Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I am back with another 2024 International Booker review, and today is the shortlisted title Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr., and this was translated from the Portuguese by Johnny Lorenz. Now, I understand that the prize is over and we have a winner selected, but as promised, I still want to do individual reviews for all of the books because I know there were a lot of people that were interested in reading them. So even though this didn't ultimately win, I still wanted to make sure I did a single review for it. And it's a well-deserved single review because this one ended up probably being my favorite from this year's shortlist. So I will go into this book review saying that I am a pretty big fan of magical realism. I know that that is not a genre or a book type for everyone, and I ultimately think that that is part of what went into choosing the winner of this year's Booker, or International Booker, I should say. I just feel like this book was probably not as accessible to most readers, especially for those that maybe were on the fence about reading this book because they maybe just don't vibe with magical realism. However, I will say that I personally feel, and this is coming from somebody that is a fan of magical realism, this book had enough of those elements to satisfy me, but I don't personally think that it was over the top or in your face and done in a way that it would put a lot of readers off. So I would say that if you're not really a huge fan of magical realism, I don't think that those elements that are in it would be enough to make you not enjoy the book. I think it was a perfect balance, and it was just enough to, like I say, satisfy somebody like me that really loves the genre, and enough to not offend or put off maybe some of you that don't. So know that going into this book. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about this book is that it took me to an area of the world that I had really never read any books from. So it was really cool and interesting to also be learning things about this group of people and that remote area of the world. So this story takes place in a very remote and rural part of Brazil, and it follows a family of subsistence farmers. And it takes place after the official abolition of slavery in that area, but unfortunately, that is still something that is very much present, and it is still occurring throughout the country at the time that this book was written. And I should say at the time that this book was set. And I cannot honestly remember, I don't think they did, but I can't remember if this book actually mentions a specific date, but we do span multiple generations, and we get storylines from a grandmother, her son, and her grandmother. So even though I don't think there was a specific date set, we do know that it takes place over several years. So it obviously starts at some time in the past, and I don't know if we actually come into the present, but it does span a long period of time. And that's something that I found very interesting about this book. And it felt like at times this book was set a long time ago, even in the parts that I knew were the most current. And there were also times where I felt that the book was slightly modern, and it was very interesting because I was just really confused as the reader. Is this taking place 50 years ago? Is this taking place 20 years ago? Is it taking place today? I just couldn't ever really put my finger on that exact timeline, and I really enjoyed that element of ambiguity with the book. It could actually make this book seem really timeless as we get into the future. So I think that maybe that was intentional by the author to make this a book that could very easily be considered a classic in that area of the world. And, 50 or 100 years from now, this book can be read, and a lot of readers could feel that it was still current for their time. So I really did appreciate that element that the author introduced us to. So this book starts with our primary two characters. They are sisters, and they are named Bibiana and Belanosia. And they are, at the beginning of the book, kind of sneaking around in their grandmother's room, and they ultimately uncover a hole underneath her bed, and they find a suitcase, and in the suitcase there is this large knife that is kind of wrapped in these old cloths that appear to be blood-stained or had previously been soaked in blood. And both of the sisters, they become almost mesmerized by this knife, and each of them decides that they are going to taste the metal. So one of them in the process ends up severely injuring herself, and she cuts off basically part or like a good chunk of her tongue, and she ultimately loses her ability to speak. And now the interesting part of the writing, now I mentioned earlier kind of the ambiguity around the timeline for me. The author also seemed to be kind of creating that layer of uncertainty at the beginning about which sister actually suffered the injury that took away her ability to speak. I went through a good chunk of this book toward the beginning, really going back and forth of wondering which sister it actually was. And that could have just been me and my experience, but it eventually is like very clearly revealed. But I do believe that there was that personal air of ambiguity at the beginning to really get me invested as a reader and to kind of shroud the story with even a little bit more of mystery, and I really enjoyed that part of the book. I think it's also important to know about this book that it is broken down into three different, very different parts. The first part of the book is narrated by the sister that was not injured. The second part is narrated by the sister that lost her ability to speak and she had her tongue injured. And then the third is narrated by someone or something completely unexpected. And I am certainly not going to spoil that for any of you that want to read this book, but I thought that that final part was really cool, and I think that the author did an amazing job of kind of bringing a lot of themes of the book and the story together, and it was a very interesting stylistic choice for the author to choose that specific or particular type of narrator. So I found that to be a very interesting element of this book as well. Now, as far as the rest of the plot of the book goes, I don't want to get into too many spoilers or specifics about all of the details of the plot, but I will say that the rest of the book, after that kind of incident that happens at the beginning, is really about the accident itself. And once we get through the parts that are involving the immediate accident at hand, we ultimately follow the sisters through that, and then the aftermath and how the sisters adjust to their new circumstances. So we have one sister that has literally lost her ability to speak. She has lost a part of her tongue, and then she has her sister that, although her sister wasn't injured, kind of in solidarity loses her ability to kind of communicate as well in a way, and she also kind of acts as the surrogate communicator for her sister because she officially can no longer speak. It's kind of a I don't want to say that it's a coming of age story necessarily. I feel like it's a loose coming of age story because we do learn at the beginning kind of how their circumstances has changed and how they're dealing with it. But I will say that it does kind of follow them through the rest of their childhood. We see them grow up together. We see them bond. We also see them also forming a little bit of a rivalry with each other. So there are a lot of specific things going on, but because it does deal with multiple characters, not just the sisters, I really struggle to say that this is a true coming of age story, but it does have those elements in it. Now, throughout the book, we are also introduced to a wide array of characters, a lot of family. So we're introduced to new family that moves into the area, and we also learn more about the girl's father, and who he happens to be the village healer. So he is an integral part of the local community. And we also learn about the grandmother as well, and how she came ultimately into possession of the knife. And we learn a lot about the backstory of the knife as well, and its ultimate significance. We learn so much about these characters and their struggles and their lives as farmers, and how rough their situation is, and all of the hardships that they are facing on a daily basis. And like I said toward the beginning, although this book is set in a time after slavery has supposedly been abolished, they still very much live under its thumb, and all of them dream of finding a way out of their current situation and ultimately improving their lives. And we eventually see both women come into adulthood, and I don't believe that it's a spoiler to say that both of them eventually marry. So we also learn about their married lives and, you know, some of the details of that as well. And like I said earlier, I don't want to get too thick into the plot because I think that this book has a lot of really interesting plot points that I would not want to spoil for anybody. But I will just say that basically as the book continues, their lives continue to be challenged in very terrible and horrible ways, and it always comes back to that incident and that accident, and how it almost seems like all of these tragedies and horrible circumstances that are happening in their lives go back to that moment as if their lives have been or are cursed ever since they tasted the metal on that knife. And this book heavily focuses on the importance importance of family and community and the support that you can get from it. Even in the most dire of circumstances, you're always going to have family or community there to help you get through those times. It also talks a lot about the specific politics that are going on in their lives. We learn about their struggles under a government that continues to suppress them. And interestingly enough, this book also talks a lot about labor unions, which I really found interesting because one of the other shortlisted titles for the International Booker this year, Mater 2-10, heavily focuses on unions. And I just thought that that was really interesting to have two books on a short list that talked or covered that subject of labor unions. And then the last part of this book that really stood out for me and that I really enjoyed was learning about their local folklore and mythology and their spirituality in general. I think that one of the most interesting things about reading translated fiction and learning about other areas of the world that we haven't been exposed to is it doesn't matter where you live or what your circumstances are, you are exposed to certain beliefs and traditions and folklores and tales that guide you through your life. And I just thought that this book was fantastic. It definitely deserved its spot on the shortlist for me, and it was actually my personal favorite. If I were on the judging panel, I personally would have been fighting for this to be the winner, but I believe I've said in some of my other videos that I just don't think that this had the broad enough appeal for more of an audience than Kairos did. I think that that is definitely going to tick a lot more boxes for people, and the fact that this did have elements of magical realism, and I fully understand that that's not something that everybody can get behind. I think that that is really what held this back from becoming the ultimate winner. So I hope I gave you enough of a teaser about this book for you to be interested enough to read it. I absolutely loved it, and I can see this being potentially one of my favorites of the year. And if you've read this book, I'm really curious to see what your thoughts of it were. And until we read again, bye.